right. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to podcast number 1 of Lassiter Law. We are here with Lacey G. My name is Mark Lassiter, and you can find me at www.lomtl, or my phone number is 214-845-7007. 007, just like James Bond.
That's really cool.
Isn't it?
Did you do that on purpose?
I actually did. So we're going through, and we'll talk about this and setting up a business, but I was going through phone numbers, and people don't realize how important a phone number can be, which leads us into our first segment, Lacey, which is how do we run a practice? So this podcast is designed so that we can take the law school out of law school. We want to teach young people how to become lawyers that have no idea how to become a lawyer because nobody ever taught them in law school. They're not giving them practical application. And so when you sit there in law school, when they get out and they go, we got this assignment, how do we do it? Nobody's taught them anything.
They don't know what's next.
They literally, when they go to their bosses and they hand them in a piece of crap and the bosses go, what is this supposed to be? Well, they did the best job they could because nobody taught them any better. There's nothing out there that says, hey, this is how you become successful in practical application in real life, not just theory.
So you're going to teach people how to do that. So this is essentially like a cheat sheet for law school graduates.
That's
do you
exactly
still have
right.
to go to law school?
Unfortunately, yes. So the
Okay.
law prevents us from actually taking the bar, which is actually, in some states, it's actually not true. If you can believe this, there's homeschool law school.
Oh, wow.
So you don't actually need a college degree in some states. And then you go to what are called these unaccredited law schools. So accredited law school is different than an unaccredited law school in that they apply to the state that they're in. They ask for accreditation. They provide a bunch of bar scores or whatever it happens to be that that particular state is looking for. And originally, I was homeschooled. And so my mother wanted me to become a homeschooled attorney. And I was like, what? No, that can't work. That's not a real thing.
I don't understand homeschool. I have a 15-year-old adopted sister, and she's homeschooled, and I don't understand how my mom teaches her stuff that my mom doesn't know. Like, she's not practicing all this math, and she doesn't know this, but she's teaching my sister how to do it.
So funny story, I can explain all of that. If you go back, of course, I'm 45 years old, but if you go back to when I was homeschooled, there was no regulation on it. There's no like booklet that you looked at. Parents were doing it sometimes for, in my case, religious reasons, but for a litany of other reasons. You get kicked out of school, where do you go? Right now we have alternative schools, and then sometimes the parents now, they're doing homeschool for different reasons. And you know what's crazy, Lacey, is that if you take the test scores, the same test scores, the SAT, ACT, whatever you want, and you compare a homeschooled child to a public school child, what do you think that's going to reveal?
I think homeschool normally would do better.
Not only to do better, they do significantly better. And this is with parents that have no formal teacher training, no formal school that they can go in and go, hey, this is how you're supposed to teach this. This is how you teach your child this. They have no training whatsoever. And they come in and they teach their children. And a lot of the time, let me tell you, having grown up homeschooled from the 3rd grade on, you just get handed a book.
And you have to figure it out. So my mom doesn't have to know anything, but she still gets to judge whenever she grades my sister's test.
That's right.
And she has the answers, and she's like, you did all that wrong.
There's a curriculum. So most people don't understand this. So homeschool is not just you sit in a room with your parents and your parents teach you 2 + 2 is 4. That's not how it works. What they do is they bring in a curriculum that they'll buy, like a Becca is one of those curriculums, and there's a bunch of other different ones. And they come in and they say, here are these books. You need to teach this chapter, then this chapter, then this chapter, math, history, science, whatever you choose to do. But the interesting part is that the parents get to choose the curriculum based on what they believe is correct. I mean, you hear this out there all the times that parents are like objecting nowadays to what their child is being taught, right?
Like the new math. The core math.
The new math or the science, or let's just take a real simple one. When you have a religion, they teach evolution. They teach the earth is billions of years old. Well, if you as a parent don't agree with that, you don't have to teach your child that because you're the teacher. You control the curriculum. Of course, we've segued out, but this all goes to practical application as law students. So when we're doing this podcast here, in the first segment, we're going to talk mainly about preparing you to be lawyers. So this podcast on the first segment is going to appeal to the law students out there, the first-year lawyers out there. Heck, it can appeal to even the college students out there that want to know what it's like to be a lawyer, but how to be successful at it. We don't want to leave you with just, hey, here's information. We are going to teach you the things that they don't teach you. In other words, we're going to homeschool you.
I was going to say, part 1, Mark Lassiter podcast. Part 2, law school, home law school. That should be your second venture. After we get through all this. I mean, we have a lot to get to before then, but backup plan for after. Maybe I'll attend.
Yeah, it's not a bad idea. And the interesting part is, since for these homeschool law schools, California, for instance, has one, all you have to do is pass the bar. You know how easy it is to pass the bar?
No.
I know all the law students
are
out there going, oh my gosh, this is so hard. Let me just tell you, I spent 3 weeks learning how to pass a bar exam. It ain't that hard.
I went to public school. I would venture out to say it would take me much, much longer than that.
So, quick segue into some of my background. So I was in the military.
Okay.
And I was in the military during law school, and I got deployed during law school. So when I was deployed, I would come back, and in law school, they have these attendance records, right? You have to sign in for class, and you have to be at a certain number of classes. Otherwise, they don't move you to the next semester. You don't get to pass that class because they believe, wrongly in my opinion, that your attendance is necessary to learn the subject matter. So I come back, and one of these times I was deployed to Louisiana. So it was Hurricane Katrina. So I'm in the National Guard, and I am helping out Louisiana people, give them food, water, whatever they needed to survive. You work on the floodwaters, making sure businesses are intact, these types of things. And I come back from a month and a half of being deployed, and they had given my seat away to a law student from Tulane.
Wow.
In Louisiana.
While you're out there working. Thank you for your service, by the way.
I appreciate that. So I come back and I go, wait a minute. You guys are not going to let me take the final for a class that I paid for, by the way, with my own money. And you gave it away, my seat, to somebody that I was helping. And I have to take some sort of detriment for this? No, that's not okay. And so one of the things I will leave everybody with, if you are in college, if you are in law school, and you don't believe something is right, you don't believe something is just, you're in law school for a reason. Don't just sit there and take it. Take it to the next level. See what you can do. Appeal the process. So I appealed the process. I went to the dean and I explained to him, I should not be punished because I went out and helped people, and for the country, I was ordered to go. Here are the orders telling me you have to be at this place. Now, if I didn't learn any of the material, but at least give me the chance to prove to you that I know what it is I was supposed to know from this semester of learning.
Spoken like a true lawyer. He was pushing back automatically. No, you don't get to tell me that.
And let me ask,
what happened?
Do we care if you know the material because you studied it on your own or some professor taught it to you? Do we care?
I don't know.
No, we shouldn't, right? The important thing is that you learned that material. That's the purpose of law school, to learn, right? So who cares if I'm in attendance and this professor or that professor taught it to me? So I explained this to them in a much more succinct manner. And I said, guys, at least give me the chance to prove to you that I know it. And I said, let me take the test. It's a final. In law school, for the most part, all of your finals are at the end of the semester, and they teach you during the semester, and you're expected to know everything, and your entire grade is based on one test. It's not like college. It's not broken up. So one test at the end of the semester. I'll say, give me the test. And I had a scholarship at the time, and they said, well, we don't want to give you the test for you to get a grade. We're going to give it to you pass, fail. And if you pass it, great, you move on. You don't have to take this over again. If you fail it, you got to take it over again. And I say, you know what, that's fair, because it tells us whether or not we've learned the material. And what do you
You're
want to
hard.
bet?
I'm going to guess you aced it.
Passed flying colors. And not only did I do that, I did that for every single class of that semester that I was gone. And I had to do it again for another deployment.
And this is exactly why you want to listen to this podcast, because this man knows what he's talking about.
So when we talk about this, homeschooling, this isn't a bad thing. In fact, homeschooling is good because it teaches you, as you were mentioning earlier, you have to learn how to solve your own problems. Well, what is a lawyer, Lacey? What's he supposed to do?
Think critically, think creatively, I would think, and solve problems.
Solve
Figure out
problems.
a nice solution of how to get what you want.
That's exactly right. Because if somebody has a problem, that's why they're coming to you. And you're supposed to have a specialized knowledge that helps them solve the problem. So from this segment, what can we take away? One of the first things that you need to learn how to do as a law student,
Argue.
think critically and learn how to solve the problem. Bosses, by the way, don't want to hear that there's a problem. When they give you a problem, they already know there's a problem. That's why they've assigned you the task. Your job is not to come back to your boss or in law school to go back and say, hey, I recognize that there's a problem. It is to provide a solution. So I would encourage every law student out there, every lawyer out there that's a young lawyer, when you are hired or when you become a practicing attorney, what you need to do if you are given a task and you have a question, right? Because you don't know how to exactly solve the problem. That's going to happen many times in life. As a lawyer, you're not going to know exactly what to do.
Many times in life, period. You're not going to know what to do.
Exactly right. But if you're reporting to a boss of any kind, do not go to him with a problem. Go to him with a list of possible solutions. So when you go to him and he gives you this problem and you work on it, you say, I'm not really sure which direction to go. Go, if I go this direction, here is what I would suggest as a solution. If I wanted to go this direction to solve the problem, these are the things that I would do as a solution. And take that to your boss and say, which solution do you like better?
Okay, give him options.
And you know what you've done? You have now brought him a problem. You have brought him a solution to the
Multiple
problem.
solutions.
And he gets to choose. And let me tell you, they feel important because they get to choose the path. And if they don't like either of those paths, they'll tell you, no, we'd rather you go this other direction. But the difference is that most of the bosses out there don't provide you the direction that they wanted to go initially. They expect you to figure that out on your own. So as a homeschooler, I can tell you that we learned how to solve our own problems because there wasn't a teacher there to ask. There wasn't somebody right next to me I could look over and cheat on their test with, right? You had to figure it out on your own, even if you didn't know. Because I come from a family of 8 children. So I have 6 sisters and a brother. And she didn't have time to teach everybody. So while she's teaching the little kids how to read and write that are in kindergarten, us older ones, we're trying to figure out complex mathematical situations with algebra. And some of that stuff just doesn't make sense if somebody's not teaching it to you. But you know what? If you have nobody that you can rely on to go and ask the question of, you got to figure it out, which means you got to read and you got to research. And we didn't have the internet back then. So guess what?
Encyclopedia.
Encyclopedias. That's what we were looking for. In fact, you have to have this huge wall in our, it's still there in my mom's house, where you have just encyclopedia all the way down this entire bookshelf. It's just encyclopedias, right?
We didn't have a lot of money, so we only had certain encyclopedias, not all of them. We had like partial alphabet.
So you were like Joey and Friends, where he learned about Vietnam and
he got the
vivisection, right? And he's like, let's talk about anything that starts with a V.
Very true.
And then they start talking about the Korean War naturally, right? Mm-hmm. So what can we learn from this? We can learn we need to provide solutions, not problems.
So first thing someone does outside of law school is become an intern, right?
Yes.
What is the best way to stand out as an intern? If your first year internship with lawyers, what's a good way to stand out? You just said solving problems and doing that. Is there any other way to be able to stand out?
There's a multitude of ways. So we'll talk about just kind of that specific question that you asked. So let's just say, for instance, you're a first year law student and you want to intern for a lawyer. The first thing that I would do is choose an area of law that interests you, right? So if you are just going to go and, let's say when I did it, I did family law internship, and I didn't do it because family law interested me. I did it because I knew a lawyer, in this case, a judge, who conducted family law trials. And that would be interesting to kind of watch those family law trials. And I knew him from my experience in the Army. And so I went and I did that internship. The first thing that I would do is suggest when you send out your resumes, don't ask for money, because you are asking them, the lawyer, to spend their time teaching you. That is a valuable asset that you can't recreate anywhere. So first, don't ask for money from an area of law that interests you. But I would do my research. Who's the best lawyer out there in this field? And the way that you do your research is much the way you would find, for instance, me, if you had a criminal problem. You would look on the internet. Who has the best ratings? Who has the best reviews? Who gets the best results? You're going to look and you're going to be able to find most of that on the internet. And then I would ask other people about that particular lawyer that you were thinking about. Peers, other criminal defense lawyers in my industry, and say, what do you think of Mark Lassiter? What's he like? Maybe you know somebody on the opposite side, like a prosecutor. What's he like to deal with? Have you ever been in trial with him? What do you think of? Find someone that you believe you can learn from, and then say, look, I'm willing to work for you for free. Right off the bat, that is the first way to stand out. You're not asking them for money. You're asking them to teach you, and you believe that their time is so valuable that you don't need to be paid for it. So that's the first way to stand out.
Okay.
Another way that you can stand out is ask questions. So many times as baby lawyers, they believe that they know the answer because they looked it up and they got taught this in law school. Well, in law school, you're learning about sometimes 1800s cases that you're supposed to find practical application for. It doesn't exist. In fact, when I started practicing law and then I gave a brief to my managing partner, he threw it in the trash because I had quoted a case from 1907. He said, if it isn't in the last 5 years, it's not relevant. Mm-hmm. So he said, start over. This is like a 50-page brief.
Oh, I know that.
And I went, oh, well, don't you want to know the quintessential case? You know, the case that determined this entire line of this topic? And he's like, no, we all know the case. Stop quoting the case that we all know. Tell us something we don't know. Apply it to the facts of our case. So what I would say as an intern is be curious. So have you ever watched Ted Lasso, Lacey?
I have not.
Right.
I'm familiar with it. I mean, it has something to do with soccer and sports and Jason Sudeikis, right?
So yeah, it's exactly right. So the in essence is Jason Sudeikis is a soccer coach who has never coached soccer, American football, right? He's an American football coach that gets brought to England deliberately to lose because he doesn't know anything about soccer or, English football, European football. So he gets brought over there and he starts winning people over slowly but surely. And he says something that is so true. In fact, I use it in trial all the time. He makes this statement, be curious, not judgmental.
Words of wisdom from Ted Lasso, quoted by Mark Lassiter, always in court. That's good to know.
But you think about it. If you're talking to a jury, and in my case, you're talking in criminal defense strategies, and you're talking about someone that's accused of a crime. If I start a trial with, ladies and gentlemen, be curious, not judgmental, what am I asking them to do? I'm not asking them to decide for my client or to like me. I'm asking them to question the evidence that's being put in front of them and ask themselves, what does it actually mean, this piece of evidence that you're giving me? Be curious about if there's another interpretation for that evidence. be curious about if there's a piece of missing evidence that you would want. And then it leads you to conclusions because you were curious. Now, if you're judgmental, for instance, we're going to talk about DWI here in a minute. Many of the officers, before they've ever done a single piece of investigative work whatsoever, I mean anything, they've decided that person's drunk. That means you're going to jail. And it's called confirmation bias because everything that they see from that moment on is lending itself to their original conclusion that that person was drunk.
So it's guilty before being proven innocent, even though that's not the way it's supposed to be.
Let me tell you, when it comes to crimes, it has always and will always be guilty until proven innocent because people are ingrained to trust police officers. They do not think police officers do a bad job because, I mean, think about how you were trained. How were you taught, raised, Lacey, to treat police officers?
With respect.
With respect. Why? Why give a police officer respect?
Because they're the man of the law and they can decide my fate.
Because they're in a position of power, right? And because they have training and because they're supposed to be honest because, and if nobody knows this before now, let me just tell you, the most powerful person in the justice system is the police officer. Do you know why?
Because they're the ones making the decision initially.
That's
on what
exactly
to do.
right. You just said it. Because they're the ones making the initial decision. Now, Lacey, let me ask you. If an officer comes in and he says, hey, I think you're drunk, right? And then he does a bunch of tests and he says, well, this confirms my original suspicions. So I'm going to arrest you. When he arrests you, he's arresting you based on what's known as probable cause, which is the second lowest burden of proof we have in the country. Do you think that after that, the prosecutor, the state of Texas, when they're given the case, do you think that they actually look at it with a critical eye and they're curious instead of judgmental? Or do you think that they just say, okay, the officer said it's true, therefore it is true?
I would imagine the latter.
That's exactly right.
They're not looking at all the paperwork or thinking about it. They're just signing off.
They don't care if you have a legitimate defense or if the officer was wrong because he didn't know this fact or that fact. What they say is, well, that's great. Present it to a jury in trial. Well, wait a minute. Trial is beyond a reasonable doubt. Why are we wasting taxpayer dollars if there's a legitimate defense that the officer never even knew about? Well, it's because they feel, wrongly in my opinion, that their job is to substantiate whatever conclusion the officer came to. Even though they take an oath that says that they're not going to do that, practically speaking, that's what happens. Now, there are good and bad in every industry, good and bad defense lawyers, good and bad prosecutors. So it kind of does make a difference on which prosecutor you're speaking with, but by and large, they try and support the officer because we're talking in generalities at the moment. And then by and large, you have a judge that's supposed to be the most powerful person in the justice system because they decide the case, right? Well, no. Most of the time in criminal defense, a jury decides the case, and a judge is relegated to ruling on objections. Now, they can make rulings that affect the case, but they're making legal rulings. So they are not deciding what happens on the case, except in very limited circumstances where they are ruling on what's known as an open plea, which we'll get into much later. But this all goes back to the most powerful person isn't the judge, isn't the jury, isn't the prosecutor, and the prosecutor makes decisions on whether to prosecute or not. But it goes all the way back to the original who has the least amount of information of any one of those people. He's making an initial gut decision based on probable cause, and then that takes legs of its own and runs away, and everybody in that order typically goes guilty until proven innocent, including a jury. Because you hear this innocent until proven guilty, well, it only really matters when it's you that's being charged. Other than that, they're thinking about guilty. Why were you charged with something?
Are you paranoid anytime you get pulled over, even if you're not necessarily doing anything wrong?
I would say that 99% of the people that get pulled over get nervous.
I'm always so nervous, even passing by. And I'm like, I'm not doing anything, but it's just that nerve of, I have before, I could be now, I could be doing something I'm not realizing, even if it's just a speeding ticket. Like, oh, I don't have time for that.
Right. What am I doing wrong? Like, that's what you're thinking, because you're not thinking in terms of, wait a minute, did I do anything? You're thinking, what did I do wrong? Well, similarly, when I have a jury that I'm talking to in jury selection, I ask them this question all the time. I was like, who's sitting out here is wondering what my client did? Almost every hand raise. Why do their hands raise? Because they think he had to do something wrong to even end up in that chair next to me. They're not thinking the officer had no right to do what he did. They have to prove it to me. They're thinking that guy did something wrong. I wonder what he did. And they can't wait to find out.
They want to get all up in people's business.
That's exactly right.
You want to know the dirty laundry of
nosiness,
your,
right?
Yeah.
They love it,
Yeah.
which is why a lot of the time the jurors are filled with retired people. Because people like me, I'm like, I don't have time to be on jury duty. Now I get struck all the time because the state doesn't want me on their jury. But for the most part, it's people with time, right? And these people with time want to hear these things because it's exciting for them. It's outside their ordinary days. And you have to know who your audience is, which is a good topic for another segment. But we're going to talk about arguing to a specific audience. But I want to kind of bring us back to kind of what our first goal was here, right? Our first goal is to educate. It's to educate lawyers. It's to educate law students. So the first thing that we want to leave our law students and lawyers, brand new baby lawyers with is never bring your boss a problem. Always bring them a solution.
I think that can be applied at any job and to the public as well. You're saying lawyers and law students. I think that this podcast is educational for everybody and not just for these people.
Well, I would agree with that because even when I was in the Army, I started out as a private, the lowest private you could possibly be, and worked my way up to become an officer. So they selected me and they said, look, we think you'd be a good officer. And so they send you to what's called officer candidate school. And so after that, and you pass that, you become an officer. But one of the things that they were always, that served me well, in fact, and this is the second point of what we've been talking about today, is learn how to solve problems on your own, okay? Learn how to have critical thinking. Like all too often, and this goes back to being homeschooled, you are given the solution. The internet is one of those things that gives us all of this information at our fingertips. I can't tell you how many times. I got a 6-year-old and a 9-year-old. And they ask me all the time, how many days to my birthday? Like my 9-year-old's birthday was only a few days ago on the 22nd. And for 30 days, he would ask Alexa, how many days until my birthday, right? And he had to explain when his birthday was. And I kept telling him, stop doing that, count. Learn how to solve this without somebody telling you. But we have become this society of, give me the answer. No, we've got to figure out the answer. And when we're talking to juries, we have to convince them to look for those answers. You have to convince a jury that, for the most part, has never thought critically before to start questioning the evidence. Well, how do you do that? We start with explaining to them why it's important to be curious and not judgmental.
Do you want to know how I know that I'm privileged coming from limited encyclopedias to today?
Sure.
Sometimes I forget which device I'm yelling at, and I will be yelling at my phone and say Alexa instead of Siri, and it takes me a minute to figure it out why it's not responding. Then I'm like, oh, never mind, wrong name.
So when you're talking to your phone, you're like, why aren't you answering me, Alexa? And
I'm
you're like,
screaming at Alexa to do something, and then I'm like, dang it, that's the wrong one. Let me refocus and call out Siri.
Yeah, let me tell you, my wife cooks a lot, and she sets Alexa timers constantly, right? But you have to give Alexa the pause, right? You have to say, Alexa, wait a second, for it to like load up and then say, set a timer for 5 minutes. Well, guess what? She gets so frustrated and because she burns so much stuff because I set a timer. I know I set a timer, but she didn't give it that extra pause, right? And then you go to Siri, and my father-in-law, he's the worst about this. If you're listening, John, you know what I'm talking about. He goes to Siri for everything. And I was like, you could just ask me. And by the time he's like, hey, Siri, hey, Siri, hey, Siri, my phone's probably going off right now. And then Siri never gives him the right answer. And it makes me laugh so hard every time. I'm like, why are you bothering? Right? Just type it in.
Another reason you should listen to this podcast. Mark is more educated and on point than Siri. Knows more than Siri. That says a lot.
Well, my wife does have a shirt that says, I don't need Google, I have my husband.
Great shirt.
All right. That wraps us up for this segment, and we are going to start up our next segment with the actual practice of law. So this segment, we're talking about practical application, how to be a lawyer, how to transition from law student to lawyer. Our next segment, and we're going to do this every time, Lacey, is we're going to talk about a specific area of law in criminal defense.
Okay.
And so we're going to do a focus on DWI. Now, this is going to take us a while. In fact, we'll probably be on DWI focus for quite some time. There is just so much information on DWIs. It's actually more difficult to defend than a murder as far as knowledge of what it takes to actually do a good job representing somebody.
I'm going to guess DUI.
Yeah, it takes the most knowledge because of the most scientific evidence. Now, you would think of murder, but murder is actually pretty simple. Did you do it? Did you not? It's either you're innocent of it or you're not, or you have a good excuse as to why you did it.
And I would imagine there's more DWI than murder.
Much more. I mean, on average, when I started, they used to arrest 600 people per month in Dallas County for DWIs. Now it's down to something in the low hundreds. But we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we are going to start with representing on DWI. All right, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I am Mark Lassiter. I am a criminal defense attorney. You can find me at www.lomtl, or you can reach us at 214-845-7007, 007, James Bond, of course. I'm here with my lovely co-host, Lacey G.
Hi.
And we are doing our first segment on crimes here in Texas. So every time that we do this podcast, we're going to give you some knowledge as to how to practice law, whether you be a law student, lawyer, whatever. And
Or just a curious mind.
Or just a curious mind. And then we're also going to teach you about an area of the law. Whether you be a lawyer, whether you be a judge, a prosecutor, a curious mind, we want to give you information about that particular crime that you can use, store in the back of your mind, and pull it out when you need it.
All right.
And today, we're going to talk about the focus is going to be driving while intoxicated. Now, most people, Lacey, when they think driving while intoxicated, you hear about this all the time. Do you hear DUI or do you hear DWI?
I thought it was DUI, and I don't know what the difference is. What's the difference? When did it turn into DWI? What does this mean?
So different states, different strokes, different folks, right? So driving under the influence is what most states call driving while intoxicated. But Texas, we got to do things different. So we decided, well, the crime shouldn't be driving under the influence, because what does under the influence mean? We want it to be driving while intoxicated. And intoxicated being mostly, people think of alcohol, but it can be by a drug, a dangerous drug, any other substance. You can be driving while intoxicated with a prescription drug. And then we had to add something else in. We said, we're going to let there be a DUI in Texas as well. And DUI in Texas is driving under the influence, but is only for minors under the age of 21. Now, here's a fun fact. You can get a DWI if you are a minor. In other words, the officer can say, even though I have this crime, which is a Class C misdemeanor, available to me to charge because all they have to have on a DUI is a detectable amount of alcohol. So basically, one drink, you're good. Or I can charge them with driving while intoxicated, which is a Class B or a Class A misdemeanor, depending on the facts. And that is a higher level offense. As an adult, you can only get a DWI in Texas. But as a minor, you can either get a DUI or a DWI, depending on your level of intoxication.
And I would guess the DWI would be the greater offense.
It is.
That would mean you allegedly drunk.
Right.
They caught you good.
Right. So DWI has 3 different types of intoxication that they can prove, right? And in a jury trial, sometimes the jury doesn't understand it because most of the time you have a test now. You have a score that says here is their BAC level. Well, when I started practicing, that didn't exist. You just said no to everything, which leads us to the main question that I want to answer for our audience today is, what do you do if you're stopped, if you're detained and investigated for DWI?
Okay, I have a story.
Okay.
And this is a friend. I swear this is a friend. This sounds like I know someone who.
This is the for a friend that we always hear about?
This is a friend.
Asking
a friend
for a
and
friend.
I went out one day.
Tell us what you did, Lacey.
And we saw a play, Little Mermaid. Yeah, it was great. And we were out all day long. We had 2 drinks the entire day. And this was an all day long affair. So by the time we're going home, there is absolutely no alcohol, none whatsoever. Well, she gets pulled over on the way home and officer asks her, have you had anything to drink? She said, I had a couple of drinks. He said, how much is a couple? She said, how much do you think a couple is? I said, a couple of drinks. That's 2 drinks. So she kind of got argumentative with this.
Right. She questioned, like, why don't you know what a couple is?
Yeah. And she wasn't guilty, ended up letting her go. Well, she called me and a friend after, and my friend's a lawyer. And she said, what am I supposed to do? Am I not supposed to be honest? And we both said, no. You're supposed to say no. How much have you had to drink? Nothing.
That's
Nothing.
the
You don't want to
question.
give them any suspicion.
That is the question of the hour. So this is what I would tell people. And this is the most common question I am asked as a criminal defense lawyer, bar none. I mean, by leaps and bounds. Well, what am I supposed to do if I get pulled over for DWI? Well, here's the sad truth. I could tell you everything that you need to do right here, right now. You'd never remember it. You know why? You're probably drunk, right? It's really hard to remember what you're supposed to do when you're drunk. Now, for those sober people out there, or people like the situation you described where I had 2 drinks over the course of 8 hours and there's no way I had a drop of alcohol in my BAC at that time. Okay, that's one situation. We're going to talk about the other situation. We'll actually talk about both, but for the situation where you've had a lot to drink, or at least, a moderate amount, you're going to jail no matter what you do. I hate to break it to you. You can't beat the ride, all right? So if you know that, and if you get your mind right when you're pulled over, you're not going to talk your way out of it. You're not going to be able to convince the cop that you didn't do anything wrong. Because what he's going to do, the first thing that he's going to do, and if you are pulled over probably anytime after 9 o'clock at night, have you been drinking? That is the first question that is going to come out of his mouth. All right. So you have 2 answers for that, right? Pretty simple. What are they, Lacey?
Yes or no.
Exactly right. Right. You can say, yeah, I've been drinking, or no, you haven't. Now, if you say yes, what do you think happens next?
I would think that's an admission of guilt automatically.
Instantaneously, the first thing that people hear is you were drinking and driving. What is ingrained to us since we were children? Don't drink and drive, right? People die, all the bad stuff that happens. You just admitted to drinking and driving. The jury is going to think you're guilty. But more than that, just like we talked about in the last segment, the cop is going to think you're guilty. So the officer, when he does his test, is just doing what's known as confirmation bias. He's not trying to actually figure it out. He's already got you.
Mm-hmm.
So what do we do? So what legally are you required to do? Do you know?
Not be honest.
No, no. The best thing, and it's a situation that I've heard all the time, is that everybody has the right to remain silent. Few have the ability. So when you are asked that question by an officer, the first thing you need to know is, what are my rights? Well, he's not going to tell them to you. So your rights, as you know them from this podcast, are you have the right to remain silent. Now, you'd think most people know that, but there are two things that you do have to provide because you were driving. Mm-hmm. You do have to provide your name and your address, right? Because if he asked for it and you failed to give it, that's fair to identify a different type of crime. We're talking about, what do you do in a DWI? The first thing that I would do is be cordial, right? Now,
Do not be combative. Do not ask him how many a couple is to him.
Have you ever heard you get more flies with honey?
Yes.
Okay. That applies in every area of life. Now, around this county and the surrounding counties, I kind of have a reputation of being a bulldog. But the difference is, and what I always tell people is, like, I go in there nice as can be, trying to get you to do what I believe the right thing to do is, by convincing you, because here is this and here is that and here's evidence that I think would help you, using honey as much as I can. It is when you have become unreasonable on the other side and you force my hand, all right, now you're going to get the stick, right? Now you're going to learn why I have the reputation that I do within the county. And then they spread these rumors like, oh, he's so mean. Well, I gave you the chance to do the right thing.
So who do you show the other side of the stick to? Not your interns.
You do it in trial.
Okay.
Okay. Now, people think that it's showing them the other side of the stick. Being good at your job is not showing them that you're being mean, right? Pointing out to a jury that they didn't do their jobs, they consider that to be mean. Where in reality, you're doing your job. You're fighting for your client to the best that you can. Now, we're talking about DWI specifically here, but this applies in every single crime that you could possibly think of, every single trial. What you are attempting to do is convince a jury, and you're not trying to lie to them. I find that most of the lawyers that take let's just say a fact, and they expound upon it to the point of unreasonableness, they lose credibility with the jury. What I find works the best is that I empower the jury to do the job that makes sense, the job that they were taken an oath to do, the job they're sitting there to do. And the only way to do that is to make them feel that it's their decision. Now, my job, in my opinion, is to phrase the facts and point out that it doesn't necessarily mean everything that the prosecutor wants you to believe that it means. They're saying, believe me because I say it's true. Okay, I understand that you have an opinion, but what makes your opinion better than anybody else's opinion? And what on earth makes your opinion beyond a reasonable doubt? We live too much in this society where I say something and that's fact. No, it's your opinion, but they don't present it like that. And this is including mainstream media. They get out there and they say, this is true, this is true, this is true. And if you ever fact checked a media, they might as well call the entire media opinion shows now, because they don't care about facts. First, they care about getting it out first, not getting it right. And then they care about whatever boss is paying them their money to, I guess, put forth a certain ideology. Maybe that has something to do with the truth. Maybe it doesn't. They don't really care.
I'm guilty because if someone tells me something, if someone tells me we're going to have bad weather today, then I believe them. And I feel like it's my duty to tell others. Now, I don't always necessarily spread false truths, but if you tell me something, I take your word for it and then I believe it.
And
not so much
able,
with the media, but yeah, if someone tells me something.
This country was built on handshakes. You know, I go back, and one of the things that interested me growing up was the Old West. They used to do what would be millions of dollars worth of deals back in those days with a handshake. You know, they used to go out and kill you if you were a liar. Being a liar used to be the worst thing you could possibly be. And everybody had guns out there, and they'd call you out and they'd kill you for being a liar. Nowadays, we spread the lies in the form of factual truths when we know that they're not. They're just opinions. But all this going back to, bringing it back to what do you do if you're pulled over for DWI? You have to know that that officer is going to interpret your behavior as evidence of intoxication, everything that you give them. So why give them anything? The only thing you're required to give them is your name and your address. So for all those people out there who ask this question, if I'm pulled over for a DWI and I can't remember all the specifics of the podcast that you talked about, what do I do? Well, the simplest thing is be cordial, give him your name and your address. And when he asks you if you've been drinking, you said, with all due respect, I don't feel comfortable answering that question without speaking to my attorney.
Okay.
That is it. You simply and very nicely and very cordially ask for your attorney. Now, he's going to tell you, why do you need an attorney? Well, with all due respect, officer, I'd like to speak to someone because I don't know. You can explain, I don't know what my rights are. You can say, I don't trust officers. There's been too many instances of bad conduct, but I wouldn't do any of that.
That still sounds combative. I think if you say, I don't trust officers.
That's exactly right. Let the attorney do your explaining for you. That's why you hire them. Just say, well, then if you're not going to will you let me speak to my attorney? When he asks you that question, hey, why do you need to talk to my attorney? Well, will you let me speak to them? He's going to say no. And he's right. You're under investigation at this point. You're not actually arrested till the handcuffs go on. However, just say, look, unless I'm speaking with him, I decline to answer any other questions.
Now, are you speaking from if you're questionably guilty, if you get pulled over and there's a chance that you are, what's intoxication level?
So intoxicated in the state of Texas is 0.08. So there's 3 ways to prove intoxication. Either you have lost the normal use of your mental faculties, or you have lost the normal use of your physical faculties, or your blood alcohol concentration shows a concentration of 0.08 or greater.
If there is a good possibility that you are under the legal limit, do you still say?
My advice would change. Now, keep in mind, my advice is if you can't remember what to do, all right? Let's say that you're in that medium range where you're like, I'm probably close. And most people don't understand this. You can be under a 0.08 at the time of driving, which means legally you're not intoxicated under BAC and still get arrested for DWI.
Oh,
because the officer decides you're not normal mentally or physically, which makes very little sense. But they had to have a method when you had a voluntary way to provide a breath test or not a breath test or a blood test or no blood test, how to arrest people, because otherwise there'd be no way for an officer to make a conclusion, no way for the state to prove their elements. So we get that. But if the officer is not given any facts by which he can support the loss of mental faculties, or no facts by which he can say, look at this person walk, they've clearly lost their physical faculties. They can't meet those two. It's impossible. So now we're only talking about your BAC. So when you do it the way that I'm suggesting, which is you don't know whether or not you are or you aren't, and you want to be safe, well, don't give them the other elements. Just say no. Just say, with all due respect, I'd like to speak to my attorney. And if you're not going to let me speak to them, then I'm sorry, I don't want to do any tests. I want to consult a lawyer first. You have that right? Make sure you have the ability. But now let's flip to the other side of this coin. What do I do, Mark, if I'm pulled over and I know I had 2 glasses of wine for dinner? Now, for the average person, 2 glasses of wine will not make you intoxicated. That's why drink, drive, go to jail, that slogan by Texas DPS is completely wrong, because you can drink, you can drive, and you should not go to jail. You should only go to jail if you're intoxicated. But like we said, people are going to judge you based on drinking and driving. They hear that. And sometimes these officers in these investigations will ask you sneaky questions like, well, would you drive a school bus full of children in your condition? And you're like, hell no. I wouldn't even drive a school bus full of children in any condition.
Yeah, that would be my answer.
But it's a tricky little question, right? Most people just say no. So you leave it up to the jury to interpret what you meant by that, which is not what we want to do. So what do you do, Mark, if I have my wits about me? I know what I want to get out of this without having to go to jail. All right, here's the way. An officer has what's known as a portable breath test, for the most part, in the back of his car. Now, a portable breath test is called a PBT, is something that he can give you, and it will test your alcohol level. Now, it's not scientifically accurate, so they cannot use it in a trial, and that's what's most important. The result cannot come into the jury's evidence. So the jury's not going to see that you were over the legal limit or under the legal limit. All they will be able to see is whether the device detected alcohol or did not. Now,
That still sounds tricky.
well, think about it. We're going to go back to your situation. You've had 2 drinks. You've been partying all day.
My friend.
Your friend, right. For a friend. So you're partying all day. You've only had a couple of drinks, or you've had enough drinks that you think it's out of your system completely. Well, ask to take the PBT test. You're like, officer, I know you've got that. I'd like to show you and prove to you that I'm not intoxicated. Now, I've had this happen where the officers say, well, we're not going to do that. We're not going to let you prove that you're not intoxicated. You know why?
Because they want to take you to jail anyway.
Because they've got quotas. These officers, and now it's not everyone, but some police departments promote based on a quota system. You have to have X number of DWI arrests per month. How wrong is that?
That's so scary.
That's us, and that's same with tickets, traffic tickets, and anything else. That is the very definition of what we don't want this country to be. We want you to be innocent until proven guilty. Nope, we got a quota, you're going to jail. We don't care if you did it or not. But then the system then starts with the prosecution supporting it no matter what. The other day, I heard of a prosecutor going to trial on a .06, which means you're not even close to .08, right? You might have had 1, maybe 2 drinks in your system total. So what do, right? You ask for the PBT. Now, if the officer says, well, why would you want to take that? Because I want to prove to you that I'm not intoxicated. And he goes, well, why don't you come out and do these tests? Now, again, we're talking about the semi-sober person here that can remember what I'm saying. These tests, the standardized field sobriety tests, are not designed for you to pass.
Because that's like where you're standing on one leg or something like that,
That's
right?
exactly right. People hear this saying your ABCs backwards. No, they never ask you to do that. They just ask you to start at a certain letter and end at a certain letter. And in counting backwards, they do ask you to start at, like, say, I would ask you to start at the number 47 and count backwards to the number 32. What they're looking for in that is, do you start at the right number or the right letter? Do you end at the right number or the right letter? And do you do it succinctly and in order?
That's questionable on me on a sober day.
I will tell you that as an attorney, if you asked me to do my alphabet, and they always say without singing, I don't know that I could do it. Mm-hmm. I mean, you would think, let's say you said, let's do a little test here.
Okay.
Lacey, I want you to start with the letter E, and I want you to end with the letter P. All right? Without singing, state your alphabet. Please go ahead.
I already thought it in my head. E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P.
That's excellent.
But
you did
only
very
because
well.
you started off at the beginning, so I already sung it in my head and got myself there.
So this is yet another excellent point for our
if
viewers.
you would have started with W, I would still be thinking right now.
Well, if you want to actually pass that test, sing it in your head and then say it when you get to that letter. So I'm thinking in my head, A, B, C, D, and then I go E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P. And so you're singing it, but in like the Frank Sinatra voice, like, hey, everybody, we're doing this, whatever it happens to be. He's not actually singing when he got old, right? He's just saying it. It's like jazz music, right? Michael Bublé. But that's one of the things they're going to ask you to do. If you think you can do that, go ahead and do it. If you don't do it. But when we talk about field sobriety test, the first field sobriety test, it's the HGN test. Now, the HGN test is also called the horizontal gaze nystagmus test. And what it's looking for is little bitty jerking in the eye. And a lot of the officers looking at it's like a windshield wiper that goes back and forth. And what'll happen is if you get like dirt in the windshield, it'll jerk, right? And it'll be visible. It's supposed to be visible to the naked eye. Now, what they don't tell you, it is the most highly criticized test of all of them, and they claim it's the most accurate. Like literally, if you look up all the literature that has been documented by people who didn't create the test. They all say to a man, this test does not work. It cannot detect alcohol to any type of specificity. And then when it was challenged in court, they even said this test cannot determine whether or not you're a .08 or not.
I was not homeschooled, but I've seen my mom's angry eyes several times, and she has big green eyes, and her eyes would dart back and forth looking at me angrily, and I know that she had nothing to drink. So
that leads us to the next one.
Already questioning that.
Well,
method.
think about this. Everyone right now has nystagmus. Everybody. It's just not visible to the naked eye. Like I'm looking at your eyes like right now, and they're moving a little bit back and forth. Well, an officer can look at that and interpret that as jerking. Does that make it actual jerking? No. So these officers, they're very poorly trained for one. Do you know that when they go through field sobriety testing, they go through a 72-hour course? They make it sound like it's 3 days. It's 72 hours. And then they test. And when they test, they put somebody up. They call these the drinking blows. In fact, I used to do them when I was a DA. They would get you intoxicated to varying degrees. Like I get intoxicated to this amount, this other person to this amount, this other person to this amount. And then we go to the trainees and they try and determine if we are intoxicated or not. Now, one of the things as a homeschool student, I had to find things to do. I became a gymnast because, look, I got to find singular sports, right, that you can do.
What can this man not do? Wow.
So we did gymnastics, right? You are not going to get me on physical attributes. Like I was standing on one leg. I'm like, what else you want me to do? You want me to walk a line? I used to bounce on top of the high bar, and we used to try and bounce the other one off, and that was the game. So at the
You're
end
like,
of the day,
I can somersault right here.
that's
this
right.
is nothing.
I can do a standing back leg. You're not going to get me. It was kind of like if you ever watched Reno 911 and they watched the guy doing the field sobriety test and the lady cop was doing pirouettes and all type of ballet maneuvers. And then she got him at the last part. It's really funny. But at the end of the day, the thing to take away is if you are sober, don't do the field sobriety tests that don't work. That proves you're drunk. Why would you do a test that you know causes failure? Just tell the officer, my understanding and my research of these field sobriety tests is that it produces invalid results. So I do not wish to submit myself to a test that produces invalid results. Can you give me the portable breath test or the ABCs or the numbers test, which you know you're going to pass? And then the only evidence the officer has is something that is good for you, evidence of not intoxicated. So he is inclined to let you go. Now, he may arrest you even in spite of all that. I have seen officers arrest people that have passed all the field sobriety tests. It doesn't mean you're not getting arrested. But again, going back to this whole segment is, what do I do if I am charged with DWI? If you're drunk or if you think you might be over the legal limit, do nothing. Ask for your lawyer very cordially. When they say you don't have a right to one, say, I'm sorry, I don't feel comfortable doing anything until I've talked to my lawyer.
So if they go to jail, which you say they're going to at that point, once they say, I need a lawyer, or let me politely decline, let me talk to my lawyer, do they call from jail? You're supposed to get one call from jail, or
No.
do you call somebody to come get you out?
So what you're going to call from jail is somebody to get you out of jail, and that's bail bond. So we'll cover that in the next segment, but that's getting somebody out of jail. That has nothing to do with really the lawyer at that point, unless they don't set a bond. But so the first thing that we've covered, right, is what to do if you're questionable or you're drunk. We also need, very succinctly, what do you do if you're sober? Well, you don't do the field sobriety test, and you tell them it's because your understanding and your research indicates that those produce false positives.
Because I listen to Lassiter Law podcast and I know better.
That's exactly right. Mm-hmm. And now when you speak intelligently like that, the officer is going, wait a minute, should I arrest this person? This person might know more than I do. But then you say, but I'm willing to take a portable breath test because it'll indicate that I am not intoxicated. And you say that confidently, even if he's unwilling to give it to you and he's unwilling to do any tests and you end up in jail, the chances are that you're going to have a very good case for the DA to dismiss. Now, one of the other topics we'll get into is what happens when you refuse everything. Well, they're going to get a warrant and they're going to get your blood for the most part. And we'll talk about those blood results in the next segment. But the takeaways today, if you're drunk, do nothing, or if you're questionable. And if you're sober, let him know that you don't want to take a test that's inaccurate and offer the test that you know you'll pass.
Okay, that's really good advice coming from smart gymnastic lawyer. Come to find out, not
There
just
we go.
Yeah, good in all kind of areas. That's really impressive.
And of course, the last and only thing that you should remember above all is if you get in trouble, call Mark Lassiter.
Where can people reach you at, Mark?
You can find me online at www.lomtl. You can reach me on the phone at 214-845-007.
He's not just a lawyer or a gymnast, he's also a bulldog. So that's all the reasons that people call you, because you've made impacts on laws here in Dallas.
That's exactly correct. And we'll get into that when we talk about the blood draws. But we don't just accept, no, we can't do that as an answer, or you have no defense. Our job is to find a way to win, whatever that happens to be, with the best possible result, without crossing any ethical boundaries, mind you. But we are going to look at a case, and if there's a way to win, we're going to find it.
That's really impressive. Very impressed by you, Mark. I'm glad that we're doing this podcast together.
Me too.
I'm learning a lot. I'm learning a lot about you, which is a lot of fun. And maybe I won't be paranoid anymore whenever a cop passes me by.
Well, by the end of this, man, you're going to go back and you're going to go to California and say, I'll take that unaccredited bar exam. I'll pass that and I'll be a lawyer.
Yeah, that sounds great.
All right. Until next time.